Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cybersecurity Recruiter podcast. Today, on this fine Thursday, I'm joined by Glenn. How you doing, Glenn?
I'm good to see you. Finally,
Good.
making this
Yeah.
happen.
For everyone listening, me and Glenn have just been laughing at the fact that we originally started planning this show in October last year. It's been a few months in the making, my friend, but we got there in the end, didn't we?
Here we are.
But no, Glenn, I know you're a busy man. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today. And for those people in the security community, or for anyone else outside the community listening, I'm just gonna, for those of you, the people that don't know you, I'll just do you a bit of an intro for the guys and girls out there listening. So, back in the late '90s, you started off at SIT. You was a manager for engineering support. You then progressed on to Circuit City. You was a manager of IT process frameworks. You were then at PA Consulting Group as a principal consultant. You then moved on to Thomson Reuters, where you progressed really nicely through the ranks over almost a decade, progressed through from technology manager, and you held multiple different director positions, progressing all the way up to director of information system security officer. You were then a lead consultant, Vault Workforce Solutions. Then you were a security and compliance consultant for DIY. And currently you are at Kalles Group. Again, you've progressed very nicely there over almost a 5-year period, and you currently hold the position of Director of Cyber and Technology. Glenn, you've been a busy man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to be here. It's funny. I had a few interim roles there. My wife and I moved from Minnesota to the Seattle area about 6 years ago now, and was just waiting on the right opportunity, the right project at Kalles Group. That's where I wanted to be. That was just my strategic target when I moved out here. But fortunately, while we were waiting for that right project to pop up, I had a few kind of interim roles that were really rewarding and I enjoyed as well to tide that over. But since joining Kalles, been helping build up a couple practices there. I love being with them because there's values alignment. Some experiences of consulting are different than others, and I love how much Kyle's Group focuses on value, not always just chasing revenue and all that sort of stuff. Of course, we have to manage normal financial baselines just to be a viable, business and stuff. But I love our focus on supporting the community, providing value, whether it's directly tied to revenue or not, and just putting our skills, experience, talent out there for the community to consume. And we trust that even in ways that don't lead to direct revenue, it still benefits us business wise in the broader sense, just to be contributors, always be in a posture of contributing. And that's the alignment with my own personal values that I greatly enjoy there.
Yeah, definitely, my friend. I really like that. There's a few things just to pick up on there straight away, and waiting around for that right role, because I think that's so key, and not jumping into stuff, because everyone wants the same things. Like, you don't want to be moving around every 5 minutes. If you make a move, you want it to be a long-term move. The employer wants that. You want that. I know it's nice when me and you, but you don't want to be chatting to a guy like me every year. You want those long-term moves. But one point I do just want to pick up on, because this could be really relevant for the listeners now. You talk there about doing some interim roles until the right role at Callis. And that could be really relevant for people listening now. If they're in a stopgap, or perhaps they've been laid off, or perhaps they're going for some tough times, utilizing that contract or gig economy or some interim work could be a really good way for people to wait around for that right role, or even for some people at the minute, it could be a way to save their bacon. How did you find those interim roles? Was it easy to pick that work up? Was it good fun? Did you enjoy it? Was it, looking back, was it a good move?
It was, and all of us go through transitions, and transitions are different in context and all that sort of stuff. But when my wife and I were looking at moving out to Seattle, I had a chance to go to work as a consultant with Abbott Medical. The FDA had recently released cybersecurity guidance for devices that were post manufacturing. And so we built from scratch a program for how do you risks assessments and do a cybersecurity remediation for devices that are no longer being manufactured. Some of those cases, devices were in human bodies, and other cases, they're
Oh,
in the
wow.
hospital. So that was fascinating. In that sense, it gave me a great opportunity to use my background, but stepping into that like medical device space was brand new to me. Yeah, I learned so much and I grew so much. And there I was I was in my late 40s when I stepped into that role. And it was funny because in that role, it was me and four new grads. That was all that the finances. I had on my first day, I had 4 people who were on their first professional day of work ever, right? And it's funny because my daughter had just gotten married, so I felt like the universe was giving me a chance to be a kind of a quasi dad again, and still be paternalistic and everything. I had been in very senior roles at Thomson Reuters, managing big teams, right? But getting back to a role where I was hands on, like really hands on, was so good for me because I had to go back to not just giving direction, not just being strategic, not just setting plans out that others are going to execute, but I had to actually be good for 6 months. I was doing most of the execution myself while I was teaching these new grads how to come along. And I think times in my career when I've shifted out of a very senior role back into very hands on, you get a chance to refresh your skills. You get a chance to really get some feedback on how relevant is my skill in area A, B, or C. And that's so helpful and so constructive for me. And so that is something that I don't know that I necessarily would have identified. That's the experience I want to very strategically pursue, but it ended up being that exact thing. And it was so good for me to do that.
It's not one of those things, Glenn, like everything happens for a reason. You've taken the interim role, you've got your hands back on the keyboard. I bet it was a bit like, oh God, got to prove it to the people. Have I still got those? Even though I'm sure you have. It's, if you've not done it for a while, it's one of those where it's like, oh God, can I still do it? But I can see how that makes you a better leader when you're managing teams and doing like that. If you can actually do the work in terms of commanding respect from the team and being able to drive productivity and people just feeling happier and working in a cohesive manner, if they know you know what they're doing and you can do it, I think it makes the game easier, doesn't it?
It sure does. And like I said, just having spent so many years at Thomson Reuters with layers and layers of, I was a director, I had senior managers, leads, the whole way down. And in some ways, I was pretty removed from my work. I still expected myself to really understand what my team was doing and working on and things like that. But I would joke with my team about, hey, Glenn, can you come fix my software? I'm running into this we had a fun back and forth around, of course you can't do that, Glenn. It's been years since you've written a line of code. And I have a very self-deprecating sense of humor in that suits me well, I think, in roles, because I'm not a super hierarchical leader. I'm more of a collaborative leader. There are times we have to snap too hierarchical in a crisis, some systems down or whatever it might be. But like I said, like I was actually writing from scratch 80-page documents on risks assessments and risk program development and things like that. And for a number of years, I had been delegating that to mid-career people. And so going back to that process was just, I got so much out of that. So I think the lesson, more of a learning for me, I would push out is don't shy away from that, right? If you've been in senior roles and you're just focusing on senior roles, there could be a ton of value of stepping into, even if you tell, whether it's a contracting firm or whatever it might be, hey, I see this as an interim step or an interim role, but don't shy away from something if it doesn't look like, oh, the title looks like a big step back or whatever it might be. I can still tell a story of what I did at Abbott. And my title wasn't super senior there because of the way that their contracting structure worked and their vendor management process worked. I could have said, oh, no, I want to find something that's a director or senior director or VP. But it was a great for me. Took it. And I feel like we can tell the story around, like, why did I do that? How did it benefit me? How did I grow and learn from that? How did I add new skills from that? Even if, like, on paper, it's not exactly what you would prefer to continue showing the normal kind of role progression and title seniority. I don't get too wrapped up around that anyway. I'm not a very status minded person. I really am attracted to interesting work, challenging work, hard work, things that are hard to do. But yeah, my encouragement is, don't get too hung up on what is the exact title or how is this going to look on my resume? Is it going to set me up for the next job or not? I think if you can tell the story of like why you did that work, why you saw it as being meaningful work and work that aligned with something that was a great opportunity for you to do something new, do something different, step into a new space, I think that plays well in interviews and just different discussions and networking you're doing to look for your next permanent job.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I'm really liking this, and I wanted like the show in general and today's show to be about like you've progressed up to a certain seniority level, director level that not everyone gets to. So for other fellow directors or business leaders listening, it'd be nice to tap into the things that allowed you to do well and continue to allow you to do so. That will be helpful for people at your level, and also mid to junior level people coming through. It'll be nice to hear you speak. And they say like success leaves clues, and there's certain things you're saying to me that I just want to point out for the listeners, and perhaps you can add to them. You talked about sense of purpose and bringing value, and you talked about how Kalles are doing stuff for the community that perhaps has no immediate financial reward or no financial reward at all. And I think these things are a real kind of like keys that I'm picking up from you, is that this allows you to play like a long-term game and keep going and be happy in what you're doing. Then you've gone on to talk about doing medical devices. So I'm thinking, hang on, this really ties in nicely with value, sense of purpose again. I can see how you've been able to keep going and keep that forward momentum moving for years and years and years. Would you say maybe thinking about the process more and thinking about being happy in your role as opposed to the end goal, is that what's enabled you to keep pushing forward over a long, sustained period of time?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, because for me, like, I've worked in technology since '98, right? And I won't go too long into, but it was completely happenstance that I landed there. I love to say, oh, I had this strategic plan. And no, I didn't. Like, I met a person who met a person. I was looking for kind of a new career after I left the Air Force and things like that. It just worked out. Most people in the kind of job I'm in, super passionate about technology, super passionate about security, and I am passionate about those things. But what gets me out of bed in the morning is the people aspect of my job, helping people, using my skill, talent, experience, knowledge to help people overcome obstacles, to help people find their next opportunity, to help people in organizations take things to the next level. As a consultant, my favorite thing to do is to help an organization solve a problem they've been trying to solve for years, haven't been able to figure out how to do that. And so for me, I'm maybe a bit of a rare, like, I'm an extreme extrovert working in the cyberspace. And so in a room, in a conversation, I stand out because I want to, like, who are you? What do you do? What are you about? Tell me your background. I love to connect with people. That's what gives me energy. That's what drives me. And of course, it always comes back to what problems are you encountering that you need, that I might be able to help with, or we might be able to help with, and those sorts of things. And so that's the sense of purpose for me. I love to mentor. I love to share my own lessons learned. I love, like I said earlier, I have a self-deprecating sense of humor. I do a lot of individual C-level consulting right now in my role. I run a practice and run teams and things like that, but I do C-level consulting. And most of what I do is tell war stories of things I thought would work and didn't work, and what I learned from them and how I grew from them. One example is, like, when I took this step up to director at Thomson Reuters, I went from running a team of a dozen people to almost 200 people. And I'm an ideator. I think out loud. I think with my mouth. And I had to learn, like, quickly with a team that big. I'm really curious about this. Or if I just say we should do X, what I really mean is we should think about doing X, or we should look into doing X, or we should figure out if that makes it. But I get very excited and I'm very energetic. And I realized if I just casually even say that, 40 people are going to go start doing this thing that I didn't really mean for everybody to drop what you're doing. And so that's a lesson I had to learn very quickly, where I had to adapt my language to. I'm curious about this. Like, we should maybe spend a little time thinking about this new thing that I heard about, or this new thing that I saw, or whatever it is. And to be way more, because I was putting things into motion that I honestly didn't have any appreciation for. Oh, they really listen. When I say something that I intend to be quite casual and just more from a curiosity standpoint, people go start doing things. There's a new CIO I'm working with right now, biggest job he's ever had in the role for about 6 months. And I tell him stories like this all the time around, you have to be more careful about just riffing. And I'm bad about it. It's a strength of mine in the right context, but it is a thing I have to be super careful about with my teams, because they will think, oh, Glenn wants us to do this. No, I'm curious about it, and I get excited about new ideas. And so there's so much that's going on there in that way of stepping into new roles and learning. And that's, to me, I think that when people take themselves too seriously, it just seems like a kind of a miserable existence. And so laugh at yourself out loud with your teams. Be vulnerable, be relatable. When they mess up, set up next to them and say, I messed up. Let me tell you about time I messed up and how I learned from that. Let's move forward. I think being human and vulnerable, really senior roles, sometimes you feel like you have to have perfect execution and come off with extreme executive and I found quite the opposite to be true. There's a story I had. One of my teams was managing at Thomson Reuters, managing a really bad incident, and I walked up behind a guy who I knew was leading the incident, and I said, hey, Tony, what's going on? And he thought I was the lead. I guess I was his director, and our voices sounded similar. And he just said, "Yo!" I was just like, because he thought he was just talking very informally with his lead. He turned around and was like, "Oh, you're my director." And I was like, "Tony, I'm just a dude. I'm here to help. You have the support you need. How can I help? Are you getting what you need from other teams that need to be contributing?" And he was immediately, his guard went down around other examples, like walking up behind someone at their cube. You just have a question for them, and they're on Facebook or whatever. They're like, "Oh no!" I'm like, "Come on, all of us check our personal email at work. We'll check it for an appointment or whatever." And I just say, you don't have to close that stuff out just because I'm behind you. We're all managing a personal and work lives and all that sort of. And so just letting your guard down and be very human and personal in that way, I just think kind of hard to willing to be hard for you. And to know that you're not there to judge the optics of what they're doing or not. I know you're working hard. I'm not worried about those things, and just conveying that is such a big part to me of being a leader, that people just, oh, I don't have to worry about being perfect in front of my senior leader.
Yeah, definitely, Glenn. And I like that. There's loads of things in there. It really just encompasses being a good leader. And I think, I say, if you take yourself really seriously, it's a bloody stressful life, mate, isn't it? If everything's a bit serious, if you can have a laugh while you're doing it, at the end of the day, whatever we say, we're going to spend a lot of our time, especially in the security world. We're all kind of a little bit obsessive, and some more than others. We're going to spend a lot of time doing this, so you definitely might as well have fun doing it. I think creating an environment as well where, not that people need to be making mistakes all the time, but if you create that environment where if something does go wrong, people aren't going to be afraid to tell you. They are going to come up to you. I'm thinking about it from a recruitment standpoint as well. Like, people are going to stick around. People are going to want to work for you. They're going to want to stay behind, start to go above and beyond. Retention rates are going to be good. So I can see why it all really helps by getting the team working together and really cracking on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when your team sees you as just a part of the team, and I always say I'm accountable for our results, I'm accountable for what we're doing, I'm accountable for making sure we're working to the right priorities, but primarily I'm there to connect you with resources that you need, connect you with other teams that you need, make sure you have what you need to do the job. If you're working hard, my job is just to support you. And there are times when employees get off track. There's a small percentage of employees that don't work hard enough, aren't really invested in the work. And you have to address those through more traditional kind of mechanisms of just like, hey, I understand, do you not want to do this job? Do you need a job? Exploring kind of what is going on around that. But to me, that's, I don't know, 4% of the employees I've ever had my just off track for some reason, and whether it's fit or lack of interest, or someone just doesn't want to work hard, or whatever it might be. Almost every other situation is just a person who needs some support of some kind, that and maybe they're a little scared to voice that because they think it's going to reflect poorly on them. So just like messaging around, if you need help, just ask for help. And there are times like, and as a senior leader, you can set the example. Like, there's been times when I've been trying to figure out like why a project is on track, and I'll go to a senior engineer and say, I have no idea what this thing is. Can you take 10 minutes and just walk me through this part of the project and help me? I know you could talk about it at a grad school level, and you just take it down to 7th grade for me. and just being that kind of vulnerable, because as a senior leader, I own thousands of assets. My team and I own thousands of assets and so many services. And of course I can't have that level of granular understanding. But when a project is way off track, you've got to, okay, in this case, I got to really dig down and understand this. And just having that kind of conversation where I need you to simplify this for me. I'm not an engineer anymore. It's been 12 years since I've done any engineering work. And just to help me understand it. And that kind of stuff just helps that person feel really empowered, feel really appreciated for the expertise and knowledge that they have. And it gives them a chance to feel like, I'm just talking to a person here. I don't need to be stressed and anxious about how I present this. In fact, he's told me, I need you to dumb this down for me a little bit.
I just want to focus in on that, because that's a really good point. Because again, there'll be leaders out there that perhaps don't feel like, not perhaps, definitely feel like they don't know everything, and they perhaps don't know how to handle it. And we've all got insecurities and stuff like that. But I think a lot of stuff you're talking about there, it's like having some humility and having the confidence. And I love the way you just throw it out there. You go, look, I haven't got a clue. Explain it to you. I really like that, just kind of, because it's like, oh, wow, that's open, honest, transparent. Okay, cool. And it's trying to find the word, it just takes the barriers down between you and that member of your team. And again, I think it breaks down a lot of communication barriers as well. It's just like, yep, sweet, got it. And I think it'd be nice for people either aspiring to be leaders or the leaders hearing that. I like that essential technique is that something that just evolved naturally? Did you just work out that it just makes life a damn lot easier if that's the approach you take?
Yeah, it's funny just because I feel as I've grown in my career, I'm just very secure in myself. And I've never felt like I have to have all the answers. I have to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, if I'm the smartest person on my broader team, I've probably built an underperforming team. I should be middle of the road in terms of that. You want to surround yourself with expertise and collaboration in people that want to work together. You want to bring those people along. Another example is I had a young lady that was leading a team, and she's probably the smartest. She's probably had a whole leadership career. She probably had the most like intellectual prowess I've ever had in any employee. And so she could mentally and intellectually work circles around anyone. And so she wanted to go. And anytime anyone slowed her down, she got really frustrated, and she made that frustration very visible and very apparent.
Okay.
And so I pulled her aside at one point and said, "Your projects all hit the mark all the time. And the main reason is that you're doing the hard work, the complex work, and you're not trusting other people to step into spaces that are going to stretch them." And I said, "Here's the thing. You can continue leading successful projects, but I want to ask you this question." I said, "Do these people working on these projects with you, if I went and asked them, would you want to work with her again? What do you think the general answer would be?" And she struggled and she said, I don't think they want to work with me again. I'm impatient. I said, literally, the one last area in your development I see to become a more senior leader is you've got to care that people working with you are having a good experience working with you. And if that slows your project down by 20%, in the grand scheme of things, that's okay. Because you're building a network of people that learn how to work with you. You're valuing them. You're expressing more support and less frustration and angst around, oh, we said we were going to do this in 6 hours and it took us 8.5, and getting hung up on all of that kind of measurement and stuff like that. And that stuff's important to measure in the macro sense for sure. If a lot of work is, if we're underestimating our work on a consistent basis, so that's a systemic thing that, okay, we got to figure out why are we underestimating work. And it's interesting because she went from being a lead, like in no time, she fixed that issue that she had. She's a senior vice president now, like 9 years later. She's an SVP and she's running a massive organization. That's a level I've never worked at. I don't necessarily pursue like always more and more senior roles. So like I said, I want to do fun work, interesting work, challenging work, and those sorts of things. But she has the ability to, it's funny because the first time I sat down and talked with her, I asked her what her future was. She said, "I want to be a project manager." And I said, respectfully, no, like you're a future CTO. And then we started that relationship. But just that aspect of and I remember when I took like back at CETA, like years ago when I became a team lead for the first time, I was persistently frustrated with everyone on my team. Persistently frustrated. They couldn't work as fast as me. They couldn't solve customer issues as quickly as me. They weren't as committed as me. They weren't as dedicated to me. And I learned pretty quickly as a leader, you got to take A+ players, B+ players, B- players, and value them all for what they can do and not hold everyone to your own standard. Because the reason that I'm advancing in my career is, yeah, I am super passionate and dedicated to my customers and dedicated to performing and providing a very high level of service. Not everyone's going to look like that. Not everyone's going to care as much. Not everyone's going to have that orientation. Some people are like, this is just my job. Like I just, and B+ players are really valuable, are really, if they're consistent and they are helpful and you can just get them oriented the way you want. And so that's another lesson, just taking people of different orientations and levels of investment, stuff like that, and putting them together and then helping within that team. You're going to have an A+ player, you're going to have a B- player, and the A+ player is going to get really frustrated with the B- player. You have to pull the A+ player aside and say, you got to stop expecting everyone else to deliver at the same level as you. There's a reason you're going to advance and have opportunities and things like that, but not everyone is wired that way. Not everyone is looking to get into more senior roles. And taking a big step back and understanding that landscape around team building was a big lesson for me. And it started with, okay, I got promoted because I'm a high performer. I can't expect to have a team of high performers throughout my whole career. That's just not how it works.
Yeah, Glenn, thanks, mate. Basically, mate, to break it down for the listeners, there's probably more. If we categorize that into two, like essentially just mega techniques, which is that first one you mentioned 5 minutes ago, which is essentially just taking all the pressure out of the situation, going, look, I don't know this. I don't understand this. You tell me what's going on. So that's like the first technique that we mentioned about 5 minutes ago. Then that last one that you've mentioned is, I think a key part of it is that particular woman that you mentioned that's now progressed to CTO. I like the fact that you said to her, you asked her a few questions first. So that's the first thing. You asked her where she wanted to go, what she wanted to be. So you established that she did want to progress, she did want to move forward. And then it was like you got her to say what the faults were. You didn't just speak at her and go, this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you're doing. You've actually got her to say it. And I think that is a really good tip for fellow leaders listening. And I think it's really powerful. I can imagine when you were sat with her, she's saying it. There's nothing more powerful than her to say it herself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And trusting like she's going to connect the dots. I don't need to lead her through the conversation. And sometimes you have this conversation and it's not clicking, and it's a nudge. It's not a, let me tell you everything. It's a little nudge. It's bringing them along. It's that technique. And that's such a huge part of team building, staff development, and helping people realize you have a lot of good stuff going on here. Here's one thing that is really holding you back right now. Let's work through that. And trusting them that like little nudges will help them go, oh, this is what's going on. And you're exactly right. When it crystallizes for them, as opposed to you telling them, because if I sit there and say, hey, so this is a major problem area, defensiveness, like right away, they pull back from the conversation. They maybe disengage. They start worrying like, why am I being attacked? And it's just a nudge, a friendly nudge, a supportive nudge, typically is enough to make that conversation get where you want it to be.
Yeah, definitely, mate. It kind of reinforces things in their own mind if they're saying it as well, and also keeps the relationship between you and the individual really solid. Because, like you said, if you're just constantly walking around the office, I know things are virtual these days, but if you're just walking around the office shouting at people and telling people, like I said, the barriers are going to go up and things are going to get nowhere. But Glenn, essentially, what we're talking about is really good communication skills. And I always think when I'm doing this pod as well, like people can go on a lot of different sites these days and refine their technical skills, and a lot of people have got their technical skills. But if they can combine it with just absolutely dynamite communication skills, they're going to absolutely fly in terms of career progression within their security career. Have you got any, it might be quite a hard question to answer, but any other communication tips for the listeners? Anything you know now that you wish you knew maybe 5-10 years ago that could help people listen?
Yeah, I think it starts with self-awareness. And my educational background is in psychology, actually. And I learned things like scientists will tell us that our personality is 80% static across our lifetime. So if you ask someone to bring a different personality to work, you're beating your head against the wall. You have to meet people where they are. And some people are not wired for being really verbose. Like my wife would tell you, Glenn will never stop talking. If you just let him go, and I'm doing it right now on this podcast to a degree, right? Like I can talk and talk. I love to listen to, and you have to, as a leader, you have to do way more listening than talking in that sense. But as a leader, I've found a tool that works for me in terms of just understanding, like when there's conflict, when there's abrasiveness, that is typically about our work styles, not about our personal feelings, not about anything like that. And so every time I've gotten a new team afterwards, whether it's a reorg or me joining an organization and having a team that I'm leading for the first time, I use the Strengths Finder framework. I want to take the, if you remember the now discover your strengths, it's getting further and further in our path. So I'm like, I wonder how many people have heard of it now, but I use that religiously. And a few examples there. When I was at Thomson Reuters, at one point, there was a senior manager that was bouncing around the organization, and she was viewed as someone who was resistant to change. And basically, when she moved to me, it was communicated to me by my SVP, this is her last chance. Like, it was, we want to see if she can land in your org and do something. And so I had her do the Strengths Finder test. And Strengths Finder, if you do the quiz, it gives you 5 strengths. And there's a book you read about what those strengths mean. And the brand she had was that she was resistant to change. One of the 34 strengths is called deliberation. And what I learned about her was she just really wants to be thoughtful, planful, think through contingencies. And here I am, a person, Thomas. I love to go fast. And I oftentimes go too fast. And when I have a big team, I'm trying to go fast. You have to be super careful about that. And so I had a conversation with her at one point, and I said, I think this is a beautiful thing because here I am. I want to go fast. I mean, one of my strengths is an achiever. I love to go. Let's go achieve this great thing. And I told her, I said, I need someone to slow me down sometimes. And Glenn, have we really talked to all the stakeholders about this? Have we checked in? Do all the stakeholders really buy into what we're trying to do here? Have we fully communicated this to everyone that needs to be communicated to? As if we really planned this out? Her name was Gayla. And I said, Gayla, I want to give you full empowerment permission. If you see me trying to move really fast on something and you're like, hang on, I don't think we're ready. I want you to come to me and say, Glenn, I think we need to slow down. And I think we need to do A, B, C, and D. Because there are times like I feel like, oh, we got it covered, or I can handle it on the fly, whatever it might be. And there's sometimes I've gotten myself in trouble with that approach. And so having a person on my leadership team that I said, slow me down if you think I need to be slowed down. And in converse she was in an operational role. She was leading a team that did 24/7/365 kind of uptime management. And I said, there are going to be times I'm going to ask you to go faster than is comfortable for you. And I just want you to trust me, and I want you to work with me on that. So it was a very equitable conversation around, you slow me down, but there are times I'm going to ask you to go faster. And so this whole brand of like resistant to change, pushing back, that was not what was going on at all. She just had a work style that was comfortable to her, and just acknowledging and recognizing that and saying, okay, this is my work style. I'm half crazy sometimes on how fast I want to go with things. This is your work style. Sometimes the situation doesn't afford as much time prep. We just got to take a little bit of risk there. So let's meet each other in the middle and help each other. You slow me down, I speed you up, and let's go. And that's one of the like most rewarding relationships I've had with the direct report my whole career. And that approach itself is just putting things in the context of work style as opposed to personalities or territorialism or what have you. It just takes all the emotion out of it and lets you set up for some success there.
Glenn, thanks, mate. For everyone listening that's either an aspiring leader or always trying to progress, I think that last 5 minutes there is just absolutely golden. There's so many things. I learned quite a long time ago that just as humans, we act on emotion, not logic. And there's so many things like in that example where you've listened to that individual, you've realized and reminded them of their value, you've given them a sense of importance. There's so many things there. You criticize yourself and shown a bit of humility as well again. And it's like all these, they're such subtle little things, but in terms of getting a team operating in a cohesive manner and getting everyone on board, these things just make a huge. And look, everything you're saying there is spot on, but it's just the way you've gone about it, and it's getting people in that frame of mind. Do you think it is teachable, or do you think you just actually got these things, or can you read some certain books and get it, or is there like a halfway house where you half got it and you've got to pull it out of yourself if you are a leader or an aspiring leader?
I think it starts with knowing yourself and understanding yourself. And like I said, I'm not saying everyone should use strength finding frameworks. That one makes sense to me, but that might just be me, right? I think it's an awesome framework and it's helped me a lot. There's other frameworks out there that a person might think, this works for me a little bit more. But I think it starts with knowing yourself, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, knowing your blind spots. Like I learned my blind spot is under planning, wanting to move too fast. That's just one I've already talked through there. And so I think it starts with knowing yourself. And I think when it comes to leading your team, it's like leading with, these are my issues. These are areas I have to really be careful for. And I'll tell people, like, if I feel like I've done enough planning, now I know, like, it probably took me way too long to learn this lesson, but now I know I'm probably done half the planning I actually need to do. Oh, I've done enough planning. Okay, I probably have half done. and so it just comes down to, I think it starts with knowing yourself, number one. Number two is being curious about who has written on this subject or who has spoken on this subject that has really informed kind of thinking, and how can that help me? Because I think that the third part is you want to be authentic, but you don't want to try to be something you're not or a person that you're not. It's just like for me saying, I will literally come off as a crazy person sometimes for how fast I want us to run at something. So just tell me, Glenn, you're being crazy. And I tell people, you can use foul if you're like, I need to get Glenn's attention. I tell people, you can swear at me, you can say whatever you want. Glenn, I need to get your attention. And it's not going to hurt my feelings ever, and that sort of thing. Because especially when we build enough trust and rapport that we like, I know this person cares about me. Thomas, I know you care about me. As long as we've been trying to make this podcast happen, you're always been like, how you doing, Glenn? And when that's built in at work too, just around, I'm not just here to check on like that thing you said you would do yesterday that you didn't get done yesterday, but first of all, how you doing? How's the family? Those sorts of things. But I think it is, know yourself, be your authentic self, and then lean into things that can help you learn how to address a blind spot that you have, like I do, like when I'm under planning, under communicating, right? And know what those blind spots are. That's a huge thing. And then know that, okay, the reason I want to work this way is because that's my personal style. It's not the right way. This is my personality showing up in my work. And just having a real appreciation for that, and then just talking openly about it, I think is huge. So I think there is a lot you can learn and grow and evolve and things like that. I think a lot of that can be incremental, but I think it's even when it's incremental, it's underappreciated how valuable that is. Let's just add new layers of capability and insight and understanding and self-reflection of those things add so much to your leadership, I think, style and approach.
Yeah, definitely, mate. I think a lot of the stuff you're talking about, it's valuable in every industry, but I think in the security space, I think if you can master these skills and be aware of the things you're talking about, I think that it's amplified even more because humility is self-aware. Every amazing leader has a high level of self-awareness. When I'm listening to, there's a big podcast, it's in the US and the UK, with a guy called Steve Bartlett. I'll send it to you actually, but every successful leader on there, a heightened sense of self-awareness. I think it's absolutely huge. Like in a remote virtual environment, do you find this stuff slightly harder? Is there any things you have to do differently? Do you wait till you meet up, or do you just go for it remote? How does that go down for you?
Yeah, I think it's a lot harder. So now a different personality might say, no, it's not. But for me, I love the face-to-face. I love being in person. I'm with my clients, I'm usually on site 2, maybe 3 days a week for half days or whatever it might be. But like one example is in the old world, before the pandemic and before we all shifted to real remote working a lot, I need to go ask someone a question. And I would just walk and like peek in them in their cube. And I felt like I could tell right away, oh, they look stressed out. Now is not the time, right? I'll wait until I see them stand up, maybe go to the water fountain or whatever it is, and I just need a minute of your time. Now, like we're all looking on whether it's Teams or Slack or whatever. Oh, they went green, and I know you're green, but I have no idea if you are trying to get 5 things done in the next 7 minutes before your next meeting starts. So it's so hard to know. So you try to adapt your language, like when you have a few minutes, can we connect? As opposed to just dropping a question straight into there. Because I don't know if I'm layering a 9th question. They're trying to turn around in the next 4 minutes before they're... We all have that, oh, I got 6 meetings for my next meeting. Maybe I can do 2 things I owe people. It's much harder. We have to be more careful with our language. If it's urgent, say, I have an urgent item. When you have a couple minutes, I really need this to connect. Versus, by the end of the day today, if you could provide this info for me, that would be helpful. It just, the context setting is so important because when you're on the other end of that, like your boss like pops up with a message, you're like, this should probably be the first thing I tackle. And in my side, I'm like, I didn't intend that. And so I think expectation setting and context setting in the virtual world is so important. And I think I'm still learning how to do that. I don't think I'm doing that maybe at a B- level right now, and I've got to keep learning and growing that because like I said, I like to move fast, and so sometimes one of the manifestations is that something will come off as give me this right now, which is not at all what I intended. So I'm still trying to get better at that too.
Do you know what? It sounds pretty fun being on the team. Like, I can swear at you. You move too fast. You tell me everything that's wrong with you. I might ask you for a job in a minute.
I just think it lightens everything up. I think you can have more fun when you're
Yeah,
real as a person and stuff like that. And like I said, there are times when somebody listening might be like, there are times when you need to really convey a ton of credibility, right? There's at Thomson Reuters when I was going through, say, there's a major cybersecurity issue that we found that's going to take, I don't know, say $800,000 to address. And I go talk to 3 business leaders, the CFO and 2 business executives who I need them to fund portions of this. I got to go in and be sharp, credible, prepared, know my stuff. And that's a time to take a little bit of a different posture. I can still be warm, right? But I have to demonstrate I've vetted this, I've looked into this, my team has looked into this is the right solution, and to convey a ton of credibility and sharpness around that point. That's not a time to go in and be like, this might be right. Yeah. And so I think situational context, I could absolutely do that. Like when I was in the Air Force, I was an air traffic controller, and I learned a lot about real-time communication, real-time issue management. I managed emergencies, all the time, and just different kinds of things like that. And some of that I've conveyed over. And that's one of the reasons I've been in operational roles, is because I'm good at dealing with major outages and things like that. I lean on some of the experiences I had then. But there are times to be in command and control, to do that softly, collaboratively, but pushing the pace on it when there's an operational outage or something like that. You got to snap when you're trying to ask for a big price tag, something to get funded by other business leaders or what have you. You've got to be really sharp in what the presentation is. But when it comes to your own team, I think you can take that more collaborative and more humanistic kind of approach. I don't want to pretend like I just walk around being this willful person who like makes fun of myself all the time, because there are environments and meetings and conversations where there's really no room for that. Right. Yeah. And hopefully in my personal relationships with those people, some of that is showing up, and so they know Glenn's not going to come in here and try to manipulate us or whatever. But there are times when the crispness, the directness, and the authority like has to convey, and you've got to know how to turn that stuff on when it's needed.
Yeah, definitely, mate. I think it goes back to that awareness piece. There's a balance with everything, and you've got to know when to essentially be a certain way. I'm glad you've brought that up, though, because again, for leaders listening, budget sign off, huge thing. How to communicate that to technical people, how to do it to non-technical people that
Yep.
are all stakeholders and in charge of finances and money and so on and so forth. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's a vital, as a security leader, it's an essential, vital skill. Is there any other things that people should be aware of when you're broaching those conversations, or tips and hints when it comes to getting things signed off?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the lessons I learned was when I took up the cyber program in Thomson Reuters Legal, working with a new CISO, and it was a new role for me. And I was presenting a lot of new budget asks and talking about a lot of things we'd never talked about before. And so I would have a meeting, say on Thursday, with 5 different business unit leaders to talk through a cybersecurity issue that needed some resourcing, some funding. I learned after one meeting, when I was looking at explaining to 5 people together, and they were all lost. They didn't have a background. They didn't have context. I couldn't give a technical explanation, or I could give them a half technical explanation. So the adjustment I made there was that if I had a meeting on Thursday with these 5, whatever the number is, 4 or 5 business leaders that need to understand it, I would do a drive-by in their office, and I would pop in for 5 to 7 minutes, and I would say, on Thursday, we're going to talk about this, and give them a chance one-on-one to ask a dumb question, express, I don't understand this, in a very safe one-on-one context. Maybe just 5 to 10 minutes. Oh, the door's open in their office. I'm going to jump in there and take this 10 minutes. And you would not believe like how much people appreciated that, because they could then go to the meeting on Thursday and not look and feel less knowledgeable than their peers in that meeting. And that's a big deal for really senior executives, especially. Right. And so that was 5 drive-bys. I want to make sure that you and I have a one-on-one chance just to talk through this at a high level, help you understand it. I got so much more response and support when I started that technique, as opposed to just introducing it for the first time in the shared meeting. After a couple of years, like, they understand it more. It didn't have to do that quite as much, but early on, they're like, I don't know what this stuff is. We've never talked about cybersecurity initiatives before, and tools and shifting resources towards vulnerability or whatever it might be. And so that little pre-meeting one-on-one is hugely valuable with really senior stakeholders, just to give them a chance to be like, no, Glenn, I have no idea what you're talking about. So give me the 3-minute walkthrough. Just like when I go to my team and say, I don't really know what you're doing here on this part of the project. Help me understand it, and give that opportunity to that person so that they come to the meeting feeling like, no, Glenn got me up to speed, so I'm not going to look like a dummy in this meeting. That technique just goes a long way.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of elevating the strength of the relationship, I'm imagining if different people within the C-suite or in the exec team, if they've got issues, I'm imagining that they can be talked about on a one-to-one basis rather than in front of everyone at the same time. So it probably helps. It's probably mutually beneficial, is what I'm trying to say. It probably really helps all around.
Yeah, and I'm talking to Bob, and Bob is like, Jerry's going to hate this. And then all of a sudden, Bob's helping me. Like, you got to be ready for this question from Jerry. And so it became like where there was like a real equitability in that conversation too.
Yeah, I can really see it. Also, as well, just a level of like effort and being genuinely conscientious as well. Like you mentioned, that's 5 trips. It might only be 5 or 10 minutes, but it's 5 trips. Like it shows that you give a shit, that you care. It's nice. It's nice,
Yeah,
mate.
yeah. You care about them feeling set up for success in the meeting and being able to weigh in, as opposed to be like, you have a 30-minute meeting, the first 22 minutes are just getting them up to speed, and all of a sudden, I only have 8 minutes to try to get you to say yes to my request. And so you're getting half the meeting done before the meeting, and then I think everyone feels like they can lean in and really, they'll talk amongst themselves. They'll take 10 minutes, and Bob will help me get Jerry on board. And sometimes I learn to say, Bob, will you help me get Jerry on board? Like, he really likes you. Or Sally, can you help me get Paul on board? Paul really listens to you, and all those kind of dynamics and stuff like that. So that goes a long way. Yeah. When you have 30 minutes and you have a big ask, you can't be down to 4 minutes left before you're like, okay, now let me tell you how much this is going to cost. You're not going to get it done.
No, definitely. And human beings, we're complicated animals, mate, aren't we? Like we need handling in a certain way. Like it's a lot to us. But just flicking back to the remote thing, I know what you mean. There's so many things that are easier in person. Do I prefer remote? Yeah, I do. It's way more convenient for my personal life and stuff like that. But there is a lot missing. But I was saying the other day internally here, I was like, hang on, we're all working remote. I'm starting just lately. I've been starting earlier, finishing later. I've got no commute. I think sometimes we've got to take a step back and go, no, let's go and meet up. Let's go for a coffee. Let's go to that conference. Let's get, because we're getting loads of time back because we're not commuting. Even if you're on site, like you said, 2 or 3 days a week, you're still not commuting anywhere near as much over the course of, say, a quarter or a 6-month period than you used to. So I think sometimes, I don't know if you're the same as me, but I'll look round and all of a sudden for 6 months I've just been on the grind. I've been going nowhere, and it's now I have got time to go and see that person or visit that client or see that. Sometimes you just gotta step back. You can just get lost in the grind, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other part of that is to do something for yourself, right? It's 11:30. My day is kicking my butt. Things on track. Everything is like, just having one of those days. Like, go give her permission to go for a walk for 30 minutes. Give yourself permission to detach and step away from it for 30 minutes. You'll be surprised, I think, sometimes how that fresh perspective, you'll just feel energized. And all that stuff will just feel less important. Because at the end of the day, sure, we need to solve these problems. Our work is important. But it all needs to be, put in perspective too. It's not nearly as important as my marriage, my daughter, all that's going on in my family and things like that. Sure, I want to be really good at my job and provide value and all those sorts of things, but trying to put that into context. And sometimes just going for a walk for 20 minutes to 30 minutes if you have that break. And sometimes I'll be like, I could get these 3 emails out. No, I need a break. I'm going to go out and go for a walk for 20 minutes and come back. And I'll probably do much better work the rest of the day if I choose to go for the walk. And so I think it's giving ourselves permission to do, oh man, I really want to connect with this person. That's a great thing to do. Or no, I need some time for me, especially introverts. But for me, like, I'm an extrovert. I can wear myself out. My wife will be like, stop talking so much, Glenn. But I think all of us need that break and just step away from it from time to time. And we're working remote. Like, I got 8 Slack messages that have been up for the last 3 hours. I can plow through no, go for the walk. If you really need to go for the walk, go for the walk. That stuff will be there when you get back and you'll get to it. If someone's conveyed some urgency around it, sure, maybe you take that one and then you go for your walk. But I think those are critical things for us to master. And this, I keep saying new, it's not really all that new anymore, but maybe it feels new just because I'm still not that great at it.
Yeah, no, mate, it does still feel new, and it was so accessible. Everything. I don't know if you're the same as me. I've got everything on the phone. I was actually considering getting the old Nokia phones that need charging up like once a month, and I was actually going to get one of them for the weekends and just leave the smartphone in the drawer, because there's always someone pinging, or you've always got like a client who's decided to work on a Saturday morning and ask you something, and it's like, oh, you just never switch. But yeah, it definitely still feels new. It's been a few years now, but it does still feel new. But what do you do to switch off, Glenn? Do you anything in particular, or is it just time with the daughter and the wife and chill, or just anything else? Or
yeah, I think the other new part of our lives is we're like, my wife and I binge watch different TV shows, and usually for us it's one episode a night or one episode every other night, whatever it is, and things like that, and just turning it off and things like that. My big interest outside of life is basketball. It's a big, like, I have a podcast about the Atlanta Hawks, the NBA basketball team, and I have a lot of expertise in that area. I do coaching and things like that, so that's my outlet, and it's still one where I'm very passionate about it. But that's great for me to do that. If you find me on Twitter, you'll find 98% of my tweets are about the NBA basketball, and they're very technical tweets about X's and O's and stuff like that. And so for me, I think it is the hobby. But to your point, Thomas, I think a lot of us maybe, when we were shifting to this mode, realized, like, I'm working 13-hour days now, and it goes like that. And it's been 4 days since I've done something I enjoy, or it's been, and God forbid, 2 or 3 weeks since I've really been able to, on a Saturday morning, go for a 4-hour hike with my wife or our neighbors, whatever it might be. And I think we really have to be good to ourselves. I think there's so much importance to making sure that we're not just giving of ourselves and over. Because, and as a leader, sometimes you feel like I need to respond to everything coming from my team today and show that responsiveness and things like that. And I've learned it's okay to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get to that till tomorrow. Let's connect in the morning. Sometimes, like, my wife's having a bad day, or I'm having a bad day, and I'll be like, instead of working until 6 today, I'm going to knock off at 4:30, and I'm going to go get a coffee with her, or whatever it might be. And I think that's something that I'm still learning to do as well, is to recognize when my family needs more of me, and giving myself permission to not work as late on that day. My wife needs help with something. My daughter trying to figure something out, trying to look for her next job, whatever it is. In the grand scheme, those things are way more important than my work all day. But sometimes my choices don't reflect that, and I've got to hold myself accountable to that.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm great at talking about how all this wonderful advice on the podcast, but sometimes reality, I let myself slip. But when I record a show like this, is doing it to me now, I'm like, listening to you, then I'm like, he's right. and it pulls me back. I think sometimes we can easily drop off. We know what's the right thing to do, but we all drop off. As long as we acknowledge that and we go, okay, I've gone off track, bang, I'm going to get back on. I think that's normal and that's cool to do as well. So
Totally.
no, it's nice to hear it. Do you know what, Glenn? So I've had a few episodes where I've not stuck to the script and maybe clocked onto it halfway through, but I think you've officially set the record, mate, because I don't think I've asked you any questions that I've planned on asking you. We've just chatted, which has been really good, man.
But that's the Glen experience. Is Glen, let's get back on plan. You have no idea how often I do that, But no, this was great. I'm glad we finally got around to it, and appreciate you having grace with me and taking the conversation.
Yeah.
You would ask a question, I was like, oh, it makes me think about a thing over here. And Thomas is sitting there. This is not really the question I do appreciate the grace and the accommodation that you've shown here today.
It's been good, mate, and it's basically been, we'll do a title, because it's been like, we'll get that framework that you mentioned earlier, I'll get that in the show notes, and we'll title this like a leadership type episode and communication, because there's loads of good stuff in it. And by the way, I know you missed one pre-schedule, but I think I did as well. I think we might be both as bad as each other, mate, because I'm pretty sure I missed one and you missed one, so I think we're even Stevens on that, so you don't need to be too sorry.
Just one of those things where it's like we both intend it to happen, and we just collaborate and work together on figuring out how to make it happen, and that's how a lot of our lives are these days. So like I said, appreciate you not being like, forget this guy, I've tried it. No, we're gonna still work at making this happen. So it's really fun to have the conversation with you, and like I said, appreciate the consistency from your side there.
Yeah, it's been good. But Glenn, mate, thank you for your time. Really enjoyed that. Lots of good things there for the listeners on leadership and communication and progressing forwards. Nice to finally get you in the virtual studio, and I'm sure I'll see you soon. Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you.